Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 84 and I am the show's host, Kyle. Everybody knows the big foreign policy news this week was Trump's big speech on Monday. I did the Wednesday's podcast, episode 83, on basically the establishment bullying their way into forcing Trump into a new plan on the Afghanistan war. In Trump's big speech, he announced that he had instincts to withdraw from Afghanistan, but after speaking with his generals, he decided not to, and so he will escalate that war. From what feedback I've gotten on the podcast, I've gotten some going over a couple things what people are criticizing. They're saying that Trump's plan is radically different than Obama's plan, and no, it's not. It's Obama's plan from 2009, put more troops in Afghanistan and force the Taliban to the table. This obviously didn't work in 2009 with 100,000 U.S. troops and 50,000 NATO troops, so it sure as hell isn't going to work this time with only about 4,000 more troops, but it's essentially the same plan. We have General Nicholson, who is the U.S. top commander for Afghanistan, coming out and saying that they're going to try to look for a political resolution with the Taliban and knock the hell out of ISIS. And of course, Obama didn't have a policy to really kill ISIS at the time. I think there was maybe some Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan they would occasionally target, but for the most part, Obama's policy was to try to force the Taliban to the table. And so now that the ISIS are an issue this time, Trump's also going after ISIS, but essentially Obama, Bush, Trump, all the same plan, trying to build a nation out of Afghanistan. The other thing is that a couple people said, well, what are you doing? It's obvious that Trump didn't say his plan at all. And yeah, we do know what Trump's plan is. He basically said we're going to add 3,000 to 4,000, or I believe 3,800 to 5,000 troops. That the U.S. is going to put more pressure on Pakistan to try to keep militants out of Pakistan, and that the U.S. is going to loosen rules of engagement for the Afghanistan war. This is very similar to what he's already done in Syria and Iraq, adding more U.S. troops, using those U.S. troops more in combat with the native troop soldiers, so either the Kurds in Syria or the Popular Mobilization Forces / Iraqi army in Iraq. The Trump policy in Afghanistan is nothing new. It's very similar to Obama's policy with, if you look at the invasion of Mosul and Raqqa going on right now, I think you're going to see that to a wider scale in Afghanistan, where the U.S. isn't going to worry about hitting civilians with drones if they think they could get a terrorist, especially if it's any kind of important terrorist. We're going to move those troops likely closer to the front lines, and so we're going to see a few more U.S. casualties in Afghanistan. These 4,000 troops, from what I'm told, will not do very much. There just isn't enough. Afghanistan is so hard to secure because it's so remote and there's so many mountain ranges and different types of terrain and everything that it's not like you could send 100 troops over there, and even if they're the biggest mass American troops, there's too much ground to cover to possibly be able to secure it without a very large number of troops. And so we're seeing absolutely nothing new out of the Trump policy in Afghanistan. This is just Donald Trump taking ownership of a losing American war. He could say as many times as we want that we're going to win, but he really doesn't define what win is, and now it looks like what win means to Donald Trump is going to be trying to reduce the presence of ISIS in Afghanistan while fighting the Taliban so hard that they kind of give up. Although likely fighting that hard against the Taliban is only going to ignite and enrage the minority Pashtun population of the Taliban and drive up the Taliban's numbers. I think you're probably going to see a spectacular case of blowback in Afghanistan. So now that this has happened, and as I said, I believe the establishment got their victory here. I think the generals, General Kelly, General Mattis, General McMaster, General Votel, General Dunford, all represented the establishment position, which is continue the war. Whatever we do, we can't lose the war. We need to sell more weapons. We need a few more soldiers on there, so it looks like we're doing more, but the American people aren't very willing to do a lot, so it's a very low number. Of course, Trump was resistant to it. And so, what does the establishment do now that they got their first victory? It looks like they've pretty much cleared out all of the more Trump campaign style people. I don't want to use the term all right, but probably the nationalists is what I used to describe them before. I think Stephen Miller is about the only one left in the administration. And while these people are not people I personally support, they were at least disagreeing with the establishment on foreign policy issues. And even if they weren't arguing the right issue, I think it's good that they're arguing. the more of a consensus that there is from the establishment, from Trump's advisors to Donald Trump, I think the more influenced he will be by it. Trump, I've heard, is, somebody who's very influenced by the last person he talked to. So if he's getting a lot of different opinions, I think he's a lot less likely to make a decision. Whereas if he's only getting one opinion from everybody around him, then I think he's going to go with it fairly quickly. And so I think a few things that are on the horizon that should be concerning is we had General Votel in Saudi Arabia going to visit the Yemen border. I'm sure he couldn't get too close to that border because I know that occasionally the Houthis, who are in the rebels in Yemen holding the capital city of Sana'a, allied with Saleh, who is the former president and commander of a lot of the military forces and took a large portion of the Yemeni with him when the country split after the Arab Spring, I believe around 2014. And so far, the United States has actively supported Saudi's war in Yemen, but without our own bombs. Currently, the United States is only fighting with our own drones and our own soldiers against Al-Qaeda in Yemen, who are somewhat allied with the Saudi coalition that the U.S. is assisting with mid-air refueling and intelligence information and selling a lot of bombs to them. So we're kind of fighting on both sides of the Yemen civil war there, but right now we're not fighting on the ground for the Saudi side, even though Saudi Arabia are allies and Al-Qaeda is allied to Saudi Arabia. But with this visit, the concern would be is that maybe the United States is looking at getting involved against the Houthis and Saleh as well. This will likely be, billed as something like we're doing it to end the war that this side is going to win anyways. And so if we help them win it, and we're going to have them do it more efficiently, Saudi Arabia is just too bloody about it or something like that. They could sell it as a humanitarian mission. They could sell it as Al-Qaeda is getting too strong in Yemen. And while they'll never mention that they're going to go and kill the most bitter enemies of Al-Qaeda in Yemen, the Houthis and Saleh, and likely overall benefit Al-Qaeda in Yemen, just like we have in so many other countries, that's never communicated. No matter how many times we warned about, action in Libya will help Al-Qaeda, because taking out Gaddafi is a man who kills Al-Qaeda, and killing him will allow them to run more rampant in Libya. Taking out the Houthis in Yemen or Saleh in Yemen will likely have a very similar impact. So I think that's a fear of ours. I think we should keep it on notice, and that might be somewhere where the establishment is looking to escalate now that they're going to have more of a consensus in Washington. Another potential issue would be the Ukraine. We have General Mattis coming out and saying that the U.S. is looking to provide lethal aid to the Ukrainians against the Russian allied Ukrainian rebels. I discussed this issue actually on the Russiagate issue with Will Porter, but just to kind of briefly get up to speed on Ukraine. During the 24 Winter Olympics, we have a coup planned by the United States and NATO allies in Ukraine to overthrow the Ukrainian government and put in place a more Western allied government. The Western allied government was able to complete the coup, and this is well known because of a YouTube video titled F the EU, where Victoria Nuland announces the US plans, and it's all recorded and out in the open. I think if anybody wants to listen to it, it's still up. The new Western-backed government immediately starts to take more westernized positions. The eastern part of Russia, which is mostly Russian-speaking largely because of policies that were in place during the Soviet Union, feels betrayed by this move and feels betrayed by the government, which is located more in the west of the country than the east. And they say, well, we rather be with Russia than be with the West. And so the people of Crimea actually voted to secede. They held a referendum and then were annexed by Russia. While this is often portrayed as Russian aggression, it does seem that the people of Crimea legitimately want to be part of Russia over being part of a Western-backed Ukrainian government. And at the end of the day, it would have been worse. It would definitely been an immoral action for the West to force the people of Crimea to remain as part of Ukraine when they didn't want to be a part of the Ukraine. We also have some of these eastern Ukrainian areas that are heavily Russian population, and they also want to join Russia, although the Russian Federation has not accepted them and told them, we don't want you to secede from the Ukraine, but the Russians have at least provide non-lethal aid, and I believe they have provided some lethal aid to these groups. They have essentially fought to a stalemate, and a Minsk II treaty is in place, or ceasefire is in place. There's still people on both sides of the border, and they shoot at each other occasionally. But the fighting in Ukraine has pretty much stopped with the state almost being broken into two. Several times fighting has broken out after U.S. diplomats or politicians like John McCain and Lindsey Graham, they head over to Ukraine and they tell the Western Ukrainian government forces to go fight against the Russians. The United States has provided these militias with weapons, and at one point they were even arming a militia that, while not officially a part of the Ukrainian government, is backing the Ukrainian government. And I believe they even have some members in parliament that are actually neo-Nazis wearing Nazi memorabilia. Anybody who wants to go look up government Ukrainian Nazis, you go and see plenty of pretty updated pictures of them standing in their SS helmets and wearing 88s and all this other kind of Nazi memorabilia. And so there's a legitimate reason that the rebels of Ukraine would rather be a part of Russia than a part of a backed by Nazi government. Providing the lethal aid, especially they want to provide the Javelin missiles, which are anti-tank missiles. Anybody who used to play Call of Duty probably knows what they are. They, you shoot them up, they go real high, and then I think GPS located will come down. And so they would probably make a pretty big impact on the battlefield and could re-spark fighting there. So that's definitely something to keep our eyes on, because if the United States does decide to back the Ukrainian government, it could potentially lead to a war between the U.S. and Russia, and also just, be concerned because of if there's more aggression, then the talks for the Ukraine joining NATO could start up again. The last one is obviously Syria. We have the Kurds telling us that the U.S. plans to stay in Syrian Kurdistan for decades. I don't know if that's true, but that would be the other place that with an establishment victory they could look to escalate. Other news I want to talk about today. The Pentagon is seeking $500 million to upgrade Guantanamo Bay. Of course, the White House is now looking at finalizing legal language that they will use to start sending more detainees to Guantanamo Bay. While Obama definitely failed in trying to close the Guantanamo Bay prison, and, largely that was a hugely disappointing part of his campaign, but he did put into place some legal measures and some executive actions and stuff like this that's making it difficult for Trump to just send more people to Guantanamo Bay. The Senate Intelligence Committee has reached a consensus that WikiLeaks is a hostile intelligence agency. This is just concerning because WikiLeaks is an organization that leaks tons of important information related to foreign policy. If we go back to the Chelsea Manning leaks, and it exposes government corruption around the world. I think it's just an extremely important website, and it's really a shame that the Senate Intelligence Committee passed a bill with this language. Ron Paul actually talked about this on the Ron Paul Liberty Report and gave some good insight into basically what happens is the CIA will tell them, oh, this language isn't important, really, that, don't worry about it. It's not worth voting against the bill for. I believe Ron Wyden was the only senator on that committee that voted against this bill. Assange talked with United States California Representative Dana Rohrabacher. Julian Assange told Rohrabacher that he is willing to, provide some kind of proof to the United States Congress that Russia wasn't behind the hats, but, says he won't give up who the leaker was. This is, of course, related to the DNC hats that was very well covered by Will Porter on I believe, Foreign Policy Focus episode 80, if anybody wants to check that out. Another story I want to cover is that there's an anti-Trump website that the Justice Department has a warrant for to get, user information from that website. A federal judge in the District of Columbia actually approved and upheld that warrant. This is, very disturbing because we don't want the government seeing who's on our websites and everything like that. That's our private information, and hopefully a different court will overturn it eventually. Lockheed Martin and Raytheon have gotten a Pentagon contract to begin to make new nuclear missiles. These will be nuclear cruise missiles. Scott Horton and Con Holland have talked about this in the past and how this could be dangerous because then any cruise missile could potentially have a nuclear warhead on it, and that would obviously be more concerning to our enemies, Russia, North Korea, etc. Russia has appointed a new ambassador to the United States. The previous ambassador was recalled to Russia just because of all the Russian hacking controversy. I believe the original ambassador, or the previous ambassador, was recalled as kind of a deal from the first Putin-Trump meeting. The commander of the 7th U.S. Fleet has been removed. This is the fleet that's in the Asia-Pacific. Since Trump took office, there have been 4 different incidents with either one of these ships crashing or having some other issue. And so apparently he wasn't running a tight enough ship and has lost his job. The Spanish terrorist who radicalized the young man who carried out the Barcelona attack that I believe now killed a total of 15 people. His name is Aldabaki Estati, and he was an imam. I guess they have some pretty good insight into how he radicalized these young men. There was, I believe, a terror organization actually of about 12 members, although only one member ended up actually carrying out a terrorist attack. Several others were killed while wearing fake suicide vests, and some have since turned themselves in. The imam himself apparently blew himself up with a bomb accidentally, I believe. He didn't kill anybody else a couple days before this attack. Apparently this attack used very Al-Qaeda style, or this man used very Al-Qaeda style 9/11 recruiting methods, targeting men of a certain age, of a certain background with brothers. It largely seems that this terrorist attack was able to occur like this because the governments weren't on the same page. There's a lot of discussion about how the government in Barcelona and the Spanish government didn't have their intelligence agencies talking the correct way, and this led to some of the problems. Of course, this is being discussed now in the context of the potential Spanish independent vote of a region of Spain that includes Barcelona, where the terrorist attack occurred. Rex Tillerson said that he was happy with North Korea about them pulling back on their missile attacks from August 15th. So that was a good thing to see. It does seem that tensions are generally ramping down between the United States and North Korea. Russia doesn't, maybe they want tensions to keep going on with North Korea or something like that, but Russia flew some nuclear capable bombers near the North Korean peninsula as a show of force. I'm assuming the show of force was to the west and not to North Korea, but maybe they were looking to scare Kim Jong-un themselves a little bit. Jared Kushner is in the Middle East, specifically in Israel, trying to work out some kind of peace negotiations between Palestine and Israel. The big question is actually what kind of peace deal he's offering, and not even I believe president of the Palestinian Authority really understands it. No idea if it's one state or two state or anything like that. So likely not going to see a whole lot out of the Trump administration on making that grand bargain there. And I think one of the potential downfalls here is we could have Jared Kushner make a half-hearted effort, and then 2 and 3 years from now, if there's any conflict going on between Israel and Palestine, Trump could shrug his shoulders a little bit. The Israelis are oppressing the Palestinians and say, well, I gave them a way out when I started office and they didn't want to accept my good deal. Other diplomatic news from the Middle East, Qatar has kicked out the embassy of Chad and told them to leave their embassy in Qatar. Chad has taken the side of Saudi Arabia and the other GCC countries in that Qatar-Saudi Arabia split. Qatar sends a diplomat to Iran and is looking at restoring diplomatic relations with Iran. Of course, this again over the Saudi-Qatar split, and it looks more and more like this is really coming back to bite Saudi Arabia in the ass. Apparently, Turkey and Iran had talks to potentially fight against Kurdish militias. I didn't get any other details on this and couldn't find any, so I'm guessing they're not out there. It looks like this statement was released by Turkey and not Iran. And so maybe Turkey is trying to inflame tensions in Syria between the U.S. and Kurdish forces or something like that. It could be kind of a propaganda story. Or it could be that the Iranians are concerned about the YPG or some other Kurdish militia and will look to team up with the Turks in fighting them. The U.S. in Afghanistan is apparently undercounting troops. The United States officially has, I think, 8,400 troops in Afghanistan, but the real number is between 11,000 and 12,000. Those numbers do not include the potential Trump surge troops, which will be between 3,800 and 5,000. Pakistan has responded to Trump's speech, specifically the part of the speech where Trump blamed Pakistan for not doing enough to counter ISIS. Pakistan said that Trump was trying to use Pakistan as a scapegoat for the U.S. failures in Afghanistan, and that the United States should focus on militias in Afghanistan and not Pakistan. So it doesn't seem like they're going to be compliant, and it does look like this is one of the reasons why it's a good thing to be a nuclear weapons state on the international stage, because you could say, stick your nose in the United States. Numbers from 2016 say that ISIS carried out 1,400 terrorist attacks, so I believe these would be, different than military attacks. and 7,000 people were killed in those attacks. ISIS did this while losing ground, and it seems to suggest that even if ISIS is defeated as a military or government-style force, they're going to continue to be an insurgency largely driven by foreign occupation. The Taliban carried out an attack in the Helmand province of Afghanistan and I believe killed 4 members of the Afghani security forces and 3 civilians. The war against ISIS is continuing, and ISIS has lit the oil fields around Tel Afar on fire. This helps to reduce the visibility of U.S. planes flying in the area, allowing ISIS fighters in the city to move around more freely. Numbers of deaths coming out of Raqqa. Since mid-June, 468 civilians have been killed by coalition airstrikes, and this includes at least 168 children. 100 of these deaths occurred in a span of 48 hours. Again, this is, I think, going to be something we're seeing more out of Afghanistan, as well as Trump loosens the restrictions on rules of engagement. Saudi Arabia bombed a Yemeni hotel earlier this week. 60 were killed in the attack, potentially 30 civilians and 9 children. One of the disturbing things about this attack is that Saudi Arabia claimed that the hotel was a good target, and it was a legitimate target because there were some rebel Houthis in the area, but they killed an awful lot of civilians and children in order to kill those Houthis. There's a possible split forming between the Houthis and Salah. Apparently there's some political discord between the two groups. These are the groups united that fight against the Saudi coalition, and a splitting of the two groups could certainly be a benefit for the Saudi coalition. And Daniel Ellsberg wrote a very good article on how Trump now owns the war in Yemen by basically picking up the torch Obama dropped off and increasing the number of strikes and everything like that in the area. Last story I gotta talk about, and that is in the Philippines, they're starting to do random door-to-door drug testing. So, these are one of the examples that the U.S. could learn from overseas, and that if you want to have a policy where you maybe eradicate all drugs in the United States, you have to resort to carrying out door-to-door drug tests, and that's really a disgusting practice, so hopefully that never happens here. Alright, I hope everybody enjoyed my show today. If you did, please share the show, Facebook, iTunes, like, subscribe there. My Facebook page is Kyle's Files, and my website is kylesfilesblog.com. The website for this podcast is foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. I'm on Twitter at KYAAALE, and my daily news roundups appear on the Libertarian Institute, so you can check it out there. Thanks, everybody. I'll be back next week.